Hey everyone, welcome back to Emblem of Doom Miniatures. My name is Deets and I hope you've all been well. I've had a fairly big month of painting, so I'm pretty tired this week. So instead of doing another painting video like usual, I've decided to do something a little bit different and make a lore video. It's something I've always wanted to do, and I always get asked by my barista and my good mates about what exactly is the Old World. So I thought in this video, I'd kind of cover absolutely everything that you need to know about the Old World, its geography, its races, its places, and kind of sum it up in one quick 1 hour video. Anyway, before we get into it, I'm going to be using some classic Warhammer Fantasy artworks and artworks from Army Books, White Dwarf magazine, Fantasy Roleplay, and also some artworks from the Total War Warhammer game. So I'll make sure I'll credit the artists at the end, and I'll also put them in the description, but if I miss any, please let me know and I'll chuck them in the comments down below. Anyway, let's get into it. So right off the bat, I'm going to drop the words Old World, as that's really a specific region in this world. So I'll refer to the planet as the Warhammer Fantasy world or the known world to make it a little bit easier for all of us. Now, the easiest way to wrap your head around the Warhammer Fantasy world is to compare it to our own planet, as it's basically modeled off Earth's geography and shares very similar continents and oceans. But this planet has 400 days in their year with 2 moons, one called Manslieb being a natural occurring moon, while the other is Morslieb, which was flung into the planet's orbit during the Great Catastrophe and the collapse of the polar gates, which brought chaos to this world. The planet itself is in a system of 10 planets and is 4th in line to the sun. I bet a few of you out there didn't think that this world had that much background information, but like all good fleshed out settings, it sure does. Let's get into the nitty gritty of the known world, and to make this easier, we're going to divide it into 3 distinct regions. Well, maybe 4 or 5, we'll see how it goes, but starting from the left hand side of the map, we have the New World, in the middle we have the Old World and the Southlands, and to the right we have the lands of the Far East. As you can tell, the New World is kind of like our version of the Americas, the Old World and the Southlands is like Europe and Africa, and the Far East is just like Asia. Let's start this journey in the New World and work our way across the planet, finishing in the Far East. Starting in the north, we have the land of Naggaroth, or you can call it by its other name, the land of Chill. This frigid landscape is the most northern continent of the New World and is home to everyone's favourite pointy-eared goths, the Dark Elves, and these guys and girls have a range of city-states located within this harsh, mountainous, forested, icy continent. Now, the first thing you need to know about this place is that it's cold, bleak, and harsh. There are heavily wooded areas covering many regions, along with jagged, icy mountains jutting in and out of the landscape, an icy sea that comes right into the heart of the continent called the Sea of Malice, and as stated in the Gotrek and Felix book Elfslayer, this sea can freeze over in winter and limits travel in and out of Naggaroth. On the land, there is a great dividing range called the Black Spine Mountain, which divides the continent in 2, and all of these harsh geographical areas have created a mixing pot for twisted creatures like manticores, giants, chimeras, beastmen, harpies, tribes of orcs and goblins, and even ancient dragons which thrive in this desolate, depressing landscape. That's why the Dark Elves are known for bringing some crazy beasts to war with them, because they're literally everywhere in their backyard. The north of this continent is attached to the Chaos Wastes, so obviously the Dark Elves will have a bad time from to time with raids from Chaos armies and tribes like the Hung, but hey, that's the way it goes in the Warhammer Fantasy world. This far northern region is fairly flat and barren and is covered with a chain of Dark Elf watchtowers. As you head south towards the Dark Elf cities, the landscape becomes a bit more fertile and plantations run by slaves are scattered throughout to feed the Dark Elf cities. If you're a slave working on the land, your body is basically considered fertilizer because you'll work until you die, and where you drop dead from being overworked is where you will stay. Also, there are some forest regions in the north and the south with trees that are so glum and dark, going for a bushwalk probably isn't recommended because some of these trees are said to even kill you by shooting poisonous barbs at you. Now, there are 6 main cities that are home to the Dark Elves, and these places are heavily fortified, covered with countless black stone spires and dungeons bursting with starving slaves. Most of these cities are located in the coastal regions, which is great for the slave trade, I guess. The biggest and baddest city is Naggarond, which is home to the Witch King and leader of the Dark Elves. The other cities are Grond, home to Morathi, Karen's Car or Slaver's Gate, Harganeth, a city built as a place of worship to Cain, Hag Grief, a city that is in constant shadow as it's surrounded by mountains, and Clarkorond, which is the Witch King's shipyard. Sorry if I mispronounced any of those. Each of these cities serves a unique purpose to the Dark Elf society and keeps this depressing machine running. One fun fact about Naggaroth is that there's actually a High Elf colony on the east coast called Arnheim, which was a port city and eventually fell to a raid led by Malekith. Those dark elves don't want any high elf simps anywhere near them. Anyway, that's enough talk about Naggaroth. Let's head south to somewhere a bit more warm. If we head down the coast, past the Straits of Fear, and over the Grey Guardians, the landscape and climate starts to change and things get a bit more tropical as we head towards the southern hemisphere of the planet. We hit this patch of land connecting the two continents of Naggaroth and Lustria, and it's called the Isthmus of Lustria. Now for the next 10 minutes, you're going to have to forgive my pronunciation on some of these words because I really have no clue on how they're pronounced. Anyway, this region was home to a Lizardmen temple city called Pahu, or the City of Ash, which was the only spawning grounds for a race of lizardmen known as the chameleon skinks, but was completely obliterated by the forces of chaos long ago, and they were thought to be extinct. There's a great story there, but what you really need to know is that this region was decimated by the hordes of chaos in the past and has a few human and lizardmen settlements here and there. But anyway, let's head further south to the main continent of Lustria. Lustria is home to many races, but the main one is obviously the Lizardmen. The Lizardmen themselves are made up of a bunch of bipedal lizard creatures which vary in size and look, and each of these species have a different role in their society. Skinks are the most common and are basically the grunts, while the Saurus are the big burly barbarian type lizards, the Croxagores are giants, and the Slan are the hyper magical frogs who run the show. There's a bunch of others, and I could dive deeper into Lizardmen society and culture, but as this is more of a geographical video, I'll save it for another time. Now, the Lizardmen have huge temple cities and pyramids all over the continent which contain spawning pools and are places of power for the magical Slan Toad Boys. The most notable Lizardmen settlements are Itza, which is the first great city and where Lord Croak resides, Shakwa, the city of gold, which was destroyed in a conflict with the Skaven, Hexodal, I don't know if I said that right, the city of the sun, which is located in the Isthmus and guards the continent from northern threats, Eoxal, the eternal city, which is famed for its skinks who ride giant bird lizards known as the Kulchan, and there are countless others that I'm not even going to try pronounce. Now, Lustria was first discovered by an old world Tilean explorer named Marco Colombo, and as word spread about its discovery in the old world, men jumped on their ships and ventured to Lustria in search of gold and wealth, but they'd never been able to achieve a massive foothold on this continent as the Lizardmen and even the jungle always has the upper hand. The oldest and largest human settlement in Lustria, which is full of men of the Empire, Norskins, Tileans, Astilians, is called Skeggi, which is a small port city located in the Isthmus, and there are also a bunch of other towns like Port Riva and Swamptown. Also, before I forget, there are a race of powerful native Lustrian women who dwell in the jungle called the Amazons, who actually had a warband in Mordheim, which is pretty interesting. They have a few scattered settlements here and there, one called the Royal Palace of Ganaina and the Temple City of Kara. When I get my hands on those minis, I'll do a full video about them, I promise. Okay, so that's enough about the inhabitants, and don't worry, I haven't forgot about the Skaven, vampires, and the undead populations that live in Lustria. I'll get onto them very soon. Let's talk about the geography of this tropical continent, and looking at the shape of Lustria, it's obviously based off South America and shares a lot of common characteristics. At least 4/5 of Lustria is covered in jungle, and the areas that aren't jungle are grassy plains, swamps, and patches of desert. If you're a human traveling through Lustria, it's basically a suicide mission, because if the Lizardmen don't get you, the flora and fauna most likely will. There are huge jungles in the northern areas and central areas like the Jungle of Webs and the Great Jungle, which are home to gigantic prehistoric predators, or what we would call in our world dinosaurs, that patrol and stalk every inch of the thick green landscape waiting for a feed. Basically, it's a green hell if you're not a Lizardman. But here's a fun fact: the jungles of Lustria weren't always this harsh and unforgivable, and were actually twisted and warped by the Slan many years ago to kind of act as a bulwark against chaos invasions. The whole west coast of Lustria is littered with clusters of island chains, from the Dragon Islands in the north to the Turtle Islands, the Mud Islands, and the Forgotten Isles in the south. There's a great mountain range that runs down the west central coast of the continent called the Spine of Sotek, which is home to huge gigantic glaciers and hundreds of active volcanoes. It's basically impassable for any man, but maybe a dwarf could pass through them. Anyway, towards the south of the Spine of Sotek, we get the temperate climates, and this area is home to a species of humpless camels called the Glamas. I'm pretty sure they're just llamas with a G, but who knows. Let's hang around the south some more before we head back up to the jungles. Here we have the Kulchan Plains, which stretch hundreds of miles and is a bit of a mystery area, as no one has really travelled here or discovered its secrets yet. Heading back up along the east coast, we have some more scattered islands, all sorts of swamps and mangroves, and towards the northeast we have the region known as the Vampire Coast. This cursed place is home to the vampire pirate king Luther Harkon, and is basically a small undead empire located in a foggy jungle-like swamp that stretches from Cape Ruin in the north down to the river Quaveza. This region is treacherous, and some swamps here are tainted with dark magic and shipwrecks from sailors who have ventured too close to the shoreline. The place is so full of dark powers that the local zombie population rise from these swamps without the help of necromancers. Basically, the Vampire Coast is a tropical undead hellhole, but a great setting for some pretty fun stories and narratives. I highly recommend doing some more reading about the Vampire Coast because there's so much deep lore to this region, which is plenty of fun. Anyway, we need to move on because I could probably talk about Lustria for hours, and this video is already in overtime and we haven't even left the New World. Let's head to the last continent of the New World, which could be considered not a part of the New World, but is, and that is one of my favourite lands in all of the Warhammer Fantasy setting, Ulthuan. I'm guessing all my High Elf simps out there probably just let off a bit of a happy squeal, and that's with good reason because this is probably the place where you would actually want to live if you inhabited this planet. So Ulthuan, or the 10 Kingdoms, is kind of a crescent-shaped or horseshoe-shaped continent to the east of Naggaroth and the west of the Old World. It takes up that space in the middle of the Great Western Ocean between the New World and Old World and is home to the ancient haughty race, the High Elves. Now, as you can see, the main landmass stretches in a ring shape that is made up of 10 kingdoms, which I'll explain in a moment, and a huge central sea called the Inner Sea, which can only be accessed by heading through the Straits of Lothan in the south of Ulthuan. This land is covered in a magical mountain range called the Anuli, which separates the inner and outer kingdoms of the High Elves. There are huge peaks, vast woodlands, glittering islands, and enormous standing stones called the menhirs, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, that channel magical energy and send it to an enormous magical vortex at the heart of the land. This magical vortex was one of the first and greatest acts by the High Elf mages many years ago to protect the world from chaos's destruction. But that's a story for another time. Ulthuan is also home to many magical creatures like phoenixes, griffins, great eagles, white lions, hippogriffs, but most importantly, it acts as a refuge to the last remaining larger populations of dragons in the Warhammer Fantasy world due to dwarf and human overhunting in the Old World regions. But anyway, let's fly through the 10 kingdoms of this magical landmass, and the reason I'm going to go through them all is because each region is geographically different from the next. We'll start with the inner-facing and more dreamy kingdoms. First up, we have Etain, located at the most southerly point of the island and is divided by the Straits of Lothan. This channel is home to Ulthuan's glittering tower and the first line of defense, the Imperial Gate, which guards the Inner Sea. These lands are dotted with vineyards, summer estates, and the city-state of Lothan, which is the main place of power in this land. Next, we have Kaldor, a mountainous and fertile land, which compared to other kingdoms isn't as well populated, but is home to a power far greater than anything else. Dragons. To the south of Kaldor and heading out to sea, you have the rugged Dragonspine Mountains, which acts as a home for these big flying lizards. Now heading north and facing the Inner Sea, we have the realm of Illyrion, which is known as the land of gentle summers and mild winters. It is a land of rolling green plains and is home to the famed elven steeds. Sticking to the inner kingdoms and heading east, we have Avalon, and this location is home to the great magical forests of Avalon. Ancient tree men tend to the wild gardens and great eagles nest in the hill areas of this land where it's always summer. This region shares a lot of similarities with the Wood Elf realms you'll find in the Old World. And to finish off the inner kingdoms, we have the Sapphire, which is known as the land of wizardry and home to the Tower of Hoeth. No matter where you are in Sapphire, the Tower of Hoeth can be seen like a sharp glowing needle pointing up to the sky. Moving on to the outer kingdoms, and we'll start in the west with the land of Tyrannic, and this place was once the most fairest of all the elven lands. This area is covered with snow-capped mountains that overlook the flower-strewn plains. It is home to a lot of ancient battles with the Dark Elves, so this land has suffered quite a bit. Next we have Naggaroth, or commonly known as the Shadowlands, and as you can probably guess, being so close to Naggaroth and also being in the north, they would cop a few Chaos and Dark Elf invasions. This land is also the birthplace of everyone's favourite Goth Elf, Malekith. The land is desolate and covered with rugged coastlines and glum forests. Now, the most northern land in Ulthuan is Crais, and this kingdom is in a constant state of war with the Dark Elves and is a region of isolated communities that live in heavily fortified wooded areas surrounded by mountains that are home to the famous White Lions. Heading east, we have Kothic, which is a vast coastal kingdom surrounded by perilous waters and contain terrifying sea monsters like krakens. And last up for the kingdoms of Ulthuan, we have a huge state that stretches almost the entirety of the east coast of the continent, Uvresi, also known as the Land of the Mist. It is a wild coastline fringed by forest and misty mountains. Now, it is considered by the elves who don't live there as an unbeautiful place and seems pretty bleak. and is very much considered to be a land that's slowly fading, if that makes any sense. There's so much more deep lore to Ulthuan, so I recommend getting into it, but let's move on to everyone's favourite land and the region where Warhammer Fantasy's main narrative takes place, the Old World. I'll get into the foremost areas first and swing back to the island lands off the coast like Norsca and Albion later. If you're looking at the map of the Old World itself, it resembles the European region of the Warhammer Fantasy world, and the countries do have similar names and cultures. Now very quickly, below the Old World you have a huge land that resembles the African continent to us, but technically isn't a part of the Old World, and this is home to places like the Badlands, Araby and the Southlands, but we'll start at the Old World and we'll work our way down to these places. And again, before I start, guys, there is so much more lore to each of these regions, kingdoms, and lands that I'll be going through that I can't do it all justice in this video. So please don't get mad if I keep it brief or miss something or make a little bit of a mistake. Looking at the left-hand side of the map, you'll see the lands of Estalia, and they occupy the southwestern area of the Old World, or where modern-day Spain is located on our map. Now, the northern regions of Estalia are covered with dry and arid mountain ranges, while the south coastlines are more fertile areas where the Estalian vineyards are located. The government here is more feudal in nature than places like Bretonnia and Empire, as there are more than a dozen dukedoms and kingdoms, all of whom are at each other's throats, wrestling for power. The Estalians love swordplay and dueling, and there are plenty of famous fencing schools throughout this land. Moving east, and in the southern pocket of the Old World, we have another kingdom of men known as Tilia. This warmer, fertile land is surrounded by beautiful coastlines on one side and high mountain ranges on the other that shield it from a lot of external conflict, but are still home to some green-skinned clans that do cause trouble from time to time. The seas that surround Tilia are full of fish due to the warmer climate, and this country is a farmer's delight. This region is ruled over by a collection of city-states run by elites who have huge mercenary armies. It is a hotbed for political conflicts and is fairly war-torn due to the numerous civil wars they have, but in saying that, it is still a powerful nation of proud men. If you're into the dogs of war, then you probably know all about Tilia. Moving north over the mountain ranges known as the Vaults, we hit the land of chivalry, Bretonnia. This vast forested land sits in between the Great Ocean and a range of mountains known as the Grey Mountains, which separates this country from the Empire. As you can probably tell, Bretonnia gets a lot of influence from medieval France, as the place is full of peasants, knights, ladies and dukes. This country's borders are second in size to that of the Empire and is home to many other races like Wood Elves who reside in massive forests like Athel Loren. Now very quickly I'll segue into Athel Loren, as this place is a vast hidden woodland kingdom that backs up to the Grey Mountains and is actually a living entity that was planted by the Old Ones long ago. It is the oldest forest in the Old World and has all sorts of spirits that defend this forest from outside threats, so it's not very smart to head into these woods unless you're in fact a Wood Elf. It's divided into 12 realms, each ruled by a Glade Lord or Lady, and each of these 12 realms is kind of locked into a different season or resembles a different time in the day. The Wood Elves are ruled by two possessed elves, Ariel and Orion. Ariel is possessed by a more of a peaceful, regenerative aspect of nature, while Orion is the crazy, angry, warlike aspect. There's a lot more lore to this forest kingdom, so I suggest giving it a read if you can. Now back to Bretonnia, and having all of these huge dense forests and mountains to the east brings about a lot of other issues, like huge packs of beastmen and tribes of orcs and goblins, but the Knights of Bretonnia are always up to the task, well most of the time, in repelling these threats. Also, they do have a few issues from time to time with the undead, but as you can probably figure out, this world, just like the universe of 40k, is at constant war, so it's a normal thing. The geography of Bretonnia is reasonably flat between huge forests. There are many villages next to rivers and in the highlands. As the climate is a bit more easygoing, farming and cultivating the land is stable, but these regions of rolling hills and green pastures are the domains of the high nobility of Bretonnia, which do demand their cut, but they do provide some protection for each pocket of land. The fortified city castle of Coron, excuse my French, is the largest city in Bretonnia and acts as their capital and has been home to numerous sieges and battles. While researching for this video, I had a huge list of Bretonnian castles jotted down, but I don't want to be here all day, so go check them out. There is a lot of great lore there. Now it's the time you've all been waiting for, and it's time to head over the Grey Mountains to everyone's favorite cluster of wacky states that make up the mighty Empire of Man. This region is the center point and the main focus of the Warhammer Fantasy world and is one of the largest kingdoms of men in the Old World region, and arguably one of the most powerful due to their ingenuity and use of magic, but that's only when they work together. Each state is run by a nobleman referred to as an elector count who is second to the emperor. Each elector count is the ruler of their electoral province, which there are 10 of. There are many races that live in the empire like halflings, ogres, elves, dwarves, vampires, beastmen, greenskin tribes, and of course men who are the dominant race and have a very dark Germanic Holy Roman Empire aesthetic, which makes them very unique. But anyway, a lot of you already know the map of this region of the Old World due to its popularity, so I'll keep it brief and I'll quickly go over some facts about each state, its location, and geography. Let's kick it off in the Wasteland, or formerly Westerland, which is actually independent of the Empire, and there's a whole debacle there with a former emperor who gave them independence for some coin, but we won't get into that. This region is located in the western coastal area covered with swamps and moors, and is also where the mouth of the River Reich is located. The River Reich is a massively important river that branches off at key areas and runs straight through the guts of the Empire and acts as a highway for importing and exporting goods around the country. The Wasteland is also home to the city-state of Marienburg, which is a highly prosperous and independent city that deals with a lot of trade in and out of the Empire. To the east of the Wasteland, you have the Drakvold Forest, and if you've read Shaman Slayer, you know this place is pretty deadly. Now moving into the actual states of the Empire, we have the Reichland, which is south of the Wasteland, and probably one of the most important states of the Empire, as it surrounds the capital city of the Empire, Altdorf, and holds a lot of strength as it housed Emperor Karl France and his huge army back in the Warhammer Fantasy days. Being in the seat of imperial power, it is the richest state, and that means it has a lot of built-up cosmopolitan areas which house universities, schools of magic, temples, market towns, and vineyards. It's very much considered the most modern state in the Old World, if you can call it that. To the direct east of Reichland, we have the long state of Stirland, which is a state that has a close affiliation with death or morbid themes, as it's bordering with the vampire-ruled lands of Sylvania. This state is considered to be a bit backwards, less educated, and poorer when compared to the other states of the Empire, but I feel like that is just because it's found itself in a bit of an unfortunate location. There's a lot of unusual weather like heavy fog that drifts across these lands, and the terrain is rugged compared to other regions. Now heading south, we hit the best state in the Empire, the glorious region of Averland. The lands here are flat, fertile, great for grazing, and the economy of this state is based around agriculture. To the southeast, near the Black Mountains, there is a valley called the Blackfire Pass, which Averland has the honor of defending. Sigmar himself fought a war against the greenskin hordes in this pass in the early days of the Empire. Below Averland, we have the Wissenland and Sundenland, or formerly Solland. Wissenland is considered the armory of the Empire, as it's bordering the city-state of Null, and this place is black powder and artillery heaven. Wissenland has many streams and rivers, but as you head towards the mountain, the land gets a bit more rugged and harsh. Now, the region in the south, known as Solland, was once the most southern electoral provinces, but is now considered to be a territory, as it was destroyed by an Orc war many years ago. Now let's skip back over the Averland region to the Mootland region, or the Moot as it's commonly known, and this is probably one of the most fun areas in the Empire, as it's basically the Hobbiton of the Warhammer Fantasy world. It's a region of gentle rolling hills, fertile farmlands, and home to the halflings. These folk are peaceful farmers who are more interested in common comforts and food, just like the traditional hobbits from J.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth. North of the Moot is Sylvania, and this place is basically the opposite of the Moot, as it's a depressing, haunted hellhole run by the vampire count's family, the von Carsteins. The region has small, scattered villages of starving, scared peasants, and is nestled right next to the World's Edge Mountains, which brings down a lot of harsh, cold winds and storms to the landscape. The land of Sylvania has haunted woods filled with hungry wolves, bogs and moors full of zombies. It's a place where you don't want to go out at night. Let's now move on to the larger sized states, and smack bang in the center we have the Grand Duchy of Talabecland, which is named after the god of wilderness and nature, Tal. Looking at Talabecland, you can see that it's basically covered in the Great Forest, which is considered to not be as dangerous as the other forests in the more northern states, but the region is about 700 miles from east to west, so it's pretty big. But for me, being an Aussie, it's really not that big of a state. This land has plenty of roads and rivers, which act as lines of trade for their huge lumber-based economy. There are a range of hills that run east to west straight through the center of their land, and their capital city of Talabheim is located inside a massive ancient crater. To the right of Talabecland, we have Ostermark, otherwise known as the East March. Ostermark is a relatively newfound state in the timeline, and its former capital is actually Mordheim, but that was before it was struck by a comet, and the rest is history. Or a cult classic tabletop skirmish game. When this comet hit, it killed the ruling family, so the remaining villages, towns, and settlements banded together and turned the government into more of an oligarchy. This land is pretty bleak and is located between the Great Forest and the Dwarven Kingdoms of the World's Edge Mountains. Now let's head west to Middenland, which lies in the central north region of the Empire and is the land of the White Wolf. This state is covered by the gloomy Drakvald forest, which is home to beastmen galore. The fortress city-state and capital, Middenheim, sits on a huge white rock that sticks out of the landscape. Ulrich, the imperial god of war, winter, and wolves, is worshipped heavily in this region, and the Temple of Ulrich attracts pilgrims from many kingdoms. To the east of Middenland, we have a state that's tucked right up against the Middle Mountains, Hochland. You've probably heard about the skill of these people as marksmen, and they're considered fairly resourceful. The land in this region is just like other states that surround it, as it's heavily wooded, but the desolate Middle Mountains are its neighbour. These mountains are so barren and fruitless in terms of resources that the dwarves who used to reside there decided to leave. In the far north on the shores of the Sea of Claws, we have Nordland. Being one of the rare states to have a shoreline in the Empire, they harbour the second largest Imperial naval fleet. The harsh windswept coasts are dotted with fortresses and watchtowers to protect the realm from northern threats. It's a sparsely populated region with glum coastlines, some rolling hills that lead into heavily dense forests in the state's south. And finally, we have Ostland, which like Ostermark borders with Kislev. Ostland is covered by the Forest of Shadows, so it's a bit dark, damp, and a misty region. Living in these forests has made the local population tough, as they've had to clear the land for their settlements and agriculture, plus they are in the thick of pretty dense forests. This state is the first line of defense in the north for the Empire, and they are consistently fighting Norskins and Chaos warbands that make their way down past the north by slipping past Kislev. The phrase that the people of this state live by is, "A wolf at the door is still a wolf." Now there is so much lore, geography, and history that I missed about the Empire, so feel free to slap an odd Empire fact in the comments below. Now we're about halfway through this massive world, so if you're enjoying the video, make sure you hit the thumbs up button down below, and maybe subscribe to the channel. I'd really appreciate it. Let's get back into it. Let's now move north to the Empire's cold cousin, Kislev. Kislev is the most northern realm of civilized men and acts as a shield for the Old World region from the northern Chaos invaders. It borders the nomadic region of Norska to its west and the dreaded Chaos Waste of the north. Ruled by a Tsar or a Tsarina, it shares common cultural similarities with Slavic states that exist in our world. It is a large cold land that is always ready for war and is known for having some of the best, if not best, horsemen in the Old World due to the landscape being flat and grassy plains in summer, great for rearing horses, but when winter comes around, oh boy is it cold. The landscape comprises of small rural scattered villages and outposts over the vast plains that sometimes have to defend themselves against chaos warbands and trolls, which makes the people extremely tough. The larger cities like Prague rival that of the large cities located in the Empire, and this Gothic-inspired city has been the location of many world-ending sieges and battles. To the east of Kislev are the World's Edge Mountains, which wraps around to the Gormandy, and as we head east we hit Norska, which is directly on the doorstep of the Chaos Wastes and borders the Sea of Claws to the south. Now as you can imagine, being located so close to the Chaos Wastes, where the ruined Warp Gate is located, means the Chaos Gods will have some influence over these savage lands, and many warlords who inhabit this region have been blessed by one of the Chaos Gods. Now Norska is inhabited by ferocious humans with no government, only the strongest and most powerful tribes survive and rule here. The landscape is a bleak wasteland where the sun barely comes over the horizon for half the year. The land is plagued by stalking monsters corrupted by the winds of chaos, and the winds of chaos blow all over these lands, and it's said it's basically impossible to stay mentally sane while living here. It has a huge coastline with many fjords that cover large portions of the landscape, which is met by the Jotunheim Mountains, which are inhabited by ice dragons, so they are best to be avoided. Basically, this place is a frozen hellscape and the land used by chaos invasion fleets and armies to mass before heading south to pillage and destroy the civilized lands. If we head further west from Norska, over the ocean to the area north of Bretonnia, we hit a small island known as Albion. Now, fun fact, Albion is an alternative name for Great Britain in our world, so you can assume this island shares some common traits with Great Britain, but with a fantasy twist. It rains every day here, it's covered with swamplands with thick fog, and is a relatively magical place, as the Old Ones, who are the beings who created the Warhammer world, had a big presence here eons ago. Its highlands are harsh and rocky, while the coastlines are full of cold, damp bogs. The land is inhabited by primitive tribesmen, led by magic users known as Truthsayers. Some of this region is inhabited by tribes of orcs, which causes some trouble from time to time for the men who inhabit these lands. But if you want more information of this island, I highly recommend reading the Gotrek and Felix book, Giant Slayer. It goes into the people of Albion's culture a fair bit, and it fleshes out some of the history of this magical island. And that's pretty much it for the Old World region, but that's only just the surface area, as there is a whole whole subterranean empire underground, otherwise known as the Under Empire or Skavendom. This intercontinental series of tunnels and caverns stretches throughout the Old World, Southlands and Darklands, and all the way to the Far East, like regions of Cathay and Nippon. It has tunnels absolutely everywhere. The only places this rat highway can't get to is the New World, as tunneling under long expanses of ocean can be a bit difficult. The Under Empire has many huge caverns containing large Skaven nest cities like Under Altdorf, Under Nuln, Hell Pit, Nor Pit, and the capital Skavenblight, which is located in the northwestern regions of Tilia. Even though the Council of 13, the Skaven warlord leaders, think they have control over this great maze, it's pretty hard to control that many rat clans over such a vast distance. As there are no landscapes, weather conditions in these tunnels, Skaven have been known to travel from Bretonnia to Nippon, which is halfway around the world, in around 6 months or so. So we've done the majority of the larger parts of the Old World region and briefly hinted at what is underneath, but it's time to head south and take a look at the Border Princes, and then we'll head along the World's Edge Mountains towards the Southlands. The Border Princes are a region that is located over the Black Mountains to the south of the Empire and the east of Tilia, near the shores of the Black Gulf. It is a rugged area that is home to plenty of bickering, self-ruled kingdoms of men that were established years ago by adventurers and refugees that headed south in search of new lands and beginnings. But like everything in the Old World, this place is full of famine, plague, and war. Human settlements are frequently attacked by warbands of greenskins, beastmen, and some undead, and according to legend, there may also be leftover remnants of subterranean lizardmen populations who were cut off from Lustria. Before we head further south, we need to talk about the World's Edge Mountains. This mountain range is the longest range in the known world and stretches from the Chaos Waste in the far north all the way down to the Southlands. It acts as a natural barrier for the Old World to the Darklands and the Far East. It was previously home to a huge dwarven empire, Karaz Angkor, but in recent years is now home to a few smaller dwarven holds and fortresses, as these mountains still have plenty of mineral wealth to offer. To the east of these mountains we have the Darklands, which we'll get into later, and this place is home to a huge population of greenskins, so this natural mountainous barrier has helped the lands in the west prosper. Anyway, let's head down to the Badlands, or as those pretty elves like to call it, the Blight. This place stretches from the Border Princes down to Nekihara and is kind of the gateway or connection point from the northern continent to the southern continent, and the further south you head, the more treacherous this landscape becomes as you hit dry canyons and undead-filled marshes. It was originally inhabited by the Dwarfs long ago, before any humans or orcs and goblins rocked up, so there are plenty of old dwarven ruins, including the dwarven city hold of Carrick 8 Peaks, which is located in the east of this land and tucked right up against the World's Edge Mountains. But unfortunately, this place is now owned by the Skaven and Greenskins. It did have a nasty troll in there at one point, but this thing is now dead thanks to our favourite dwarf slayer Gotrek Gurnison. Anyway, let's head further south on the map and visit the Land of the Dead, or Nekihara, which is home to the Tomb Kings. This region stretches from the Badlands in the north to the steaming jungles in the Southlands, to the great deserts near Araby in the west, and all the way to the Bitter Sea in the east. Long ago, this was a mighty kingdom of men, and the land was a thriving place with fertile lands, but is now a steaming, hot, barren desert with large regions of quicksand, and is scattered with decaying tomb cities, great pyramids, and temples that house the dead and ancient spirits. The sun will burn you to a crisp. There are empty plains filled to the brim with skeletons that will literally come to life and drag you underneath the sand. The rivers are poisonous, so you can't have a drink. And how could I forget the flesh-eating scarabs as well? It's just not a nice place to be. Khemri was once the capital of this desert empire and is home to Settra the Imperishable, who sits on his big old gold and gem-filled throne in his palace that overlooks the Great Pyramid of Settra, which is huge. But unfortunately, Settra has lost the battle in who has the biggest pyramid, as that goes to Nagash, and his larger black pyramid sits on the outskirts of Khemri, and in a way it kind of taunts Settra. There's a lot of ancient history there, including some history about the vampires. But anyway, let's now head west and away from all the death and decay and head to another desert kingdom which has less mummies and is ruled by sultans and sheiks, the Land of Araby. As you can guess by the name, this region of the known world takes a lot of inspiration from Middle Eastern cultures and geographic locations, but with a fantasy twist. And most of the cities and towns are located on the coastline of Araby, while you'll find many of its nomadic tribes inland in the heavier deserted regions or living along the Atalan Mountains, which provides a bit of shade and water. A lot of the people of Araby are merchants who trade with Tilia, High Elves, and even have a small presence in the empire city of Marienburg. The sultans of Araby love to collect all sorts of exotic animals, which they bring up from the more tropical Southlands, and they love to compete with one another to see who has the bigger elephant herd. Snakes, scorpions, dune dragons, and camels inhabit the land, but the prized creature of choice for Arabians is the Arabian red hawk, which is also a fairly sought after creature back in the Old World. Compared to the populations in the Old World, there isn't as much information on Araby, but there have been a few miniatures made by GW that are from the Desert Kingdom, like Al-Maktar's Desert Dogs, Man-Eater Ogre, and there are a heap of minis from the War Master game. With the Old World back in action, and as we have Cathay coming into the setting, I would love for Araby to be brought into the mix because I really want to paint up some camels and elephants and maybe a magic carpet or two. As we head south past the Gulf of Medes, we hit a more tropical climate and arrive in the Southlands. This region is covered in dense jungle, heavy swamps, and doesn't get many visitors due to its location, and the groups or individuals that do head here are rarely heard from again. It was once considered to be part of Lustria before the old ones reshaped the known world. As the Southlands is one big old jungle, you can definitely expect it to be home to some more populations of Lizardmen, one of the main ones located in the hidden temple city of Zlatlan. Zlatlan is one of the few Lizardmen cities in the Southlands that remains intact, and one fun fact about this city is that many of the Lizardmen's ancient relics that were gifted from the old ones are still accounted for here, and this is mainly due to the ancient city's hidden location. They haven't suffered from as many raids or invasions compared to the other cities in Lustria. The Lizardmen of the Southlands are more dependent on skinks, as the Saurus breed of Lizardmen are rarely birthed from their spawning pools. This makes the skinks of the Southland a little bit more vicious. Now, it's not only Lizardmen who live all the way down here, there are also some men, savage orcs, beastmen, and some small elven colonies or citadels that are located at the very southern coastline. There was once a dwarven hold all the way down here called Carrickzorn on the southern end of the World's Edge Mountains, which has been abandoned or destroyed, possibly by elven magic according to Gotrek Gurnason. Also, yes, that brings me to another fun fact about this land, that this is basically the bottom of the known world and is where the great World's Edge Mountains end. And with that, it's time to move on and head up the east side of the continent, past the shifting mangrove coastlines, through the Sea of Dread, all the way up the right-hand side of the World's Edge Mountains to a place known as the Darklands, which is the first region we will visit in the far east in the Warhammer Fantasy world. Now, the Darklands, like the name suggests, is a bit of a desolate, barren, ashy waste area, and I would probably compare it more to like Mordor from the Lord of the Rings, and this land is nestled between the World's Edge Mountains to the west and the Mountains of Morn on the east. It's scattered with volcanoes whose black smoke blankets the sky, sharp jagged hills scatter the landscape, and cheerless barren plains spread as far as the eye can see, and the place stinks like oil and tar. This mix of characteristics has made the landscape infertile, so no vegetation can grow here. But in saying that, the land is rich with all sorts of mineral wealth like gold, silver, copper, and gems. And who loves those things more than anyone else? You guessed it, the Dwarfs. But the Dwarfs in this land are a bit different from the Dwarfs in the West, as they are the Chaos Dwarfs. Dwarfs who follow the father of darkness, the dark god Hashut, wear big hats, love some slavery, and are evil to their core. The northern areas of the Darklands is where the main empire of the Chaos Dwarfs is located. The plain of Zar surrounds the large Chaos Dwarf city of Zar Nagrond, which is run by a conclave of Chaos Dwarf sorcerers and where a lot of the Chaos Dwarf industry takes place. And what helps this industry move along is hordes of green-skinned slaves. There is also the Black Fortress in the southeastern pocket of the Badlands, which has a pretty badass design. There's another fortress called Demon Stump, which is said to be where a bloodthirsty demon and an ogre got into a brawl, and the demon was entombed there, so the Chaos Dwarfs decided to build a settlement over it. I guess that's just a normal thing. But anyway, as you head south through the center of the Darklands and running through the middle from east to west, you have the Ivory Road, which is much like our Silk Road. This is the main route of trade between the Far East and the Old World. This road is treacherous, as you're likely to get raided by parties of orcs, goblins, ogres, chaos dwarfs, you name it. Below that, we head down past the Ash Ridge Mountains to the Plain of Bones, which centuries ago, according to ancient texts from Khemri, used to be called the Plain of Plenty. Now, further south, we have the coastline of the Darklands, and this area is so treacherous that no port cities or towns can be built here, but there is one town with a small human presence located in the southeast of the Darklands on the River Ruin called Pigbarta. And this town is choked by yellow fumes and constantly raided by Noblars, so the houses here are built up on stilts, and the stilts are covered with broken glass and nails to keep these greenskins out. Let's head even further east now, and this is where we hit the landscape known as the Mountains of Morn, which are home to the brutish race known as the Ogres. This region is tightly packed with huge frozen, highly elevated mountain peaks, wide valleys, and is ruled over by tyrant ogres, who are the guys who wield the biggest sticks in their kingdoms and rule mainly with their stomachs. Now, I would consider this region to be kind of like the Himalayas of the Warhammer Fantasy world, as it's highly elevated, and the majority of this landscape is snowy and mountainous, but in contrast to that, close to the Sea of Dread, there are some woodland regions. Now, being so close to the northern waste, the chaos winds that blow down tend to mix with your environment, and gigantic glaciers can form within hours, and these things move quickly across the landscape, destroying roads, paths, and even settlements. Due to the different altitudes and elevations in this region, it's home to a pretty diverse range of creatures like Gnoblars, Yetis, ice mammoths, dragon ogres, manticores, chimeras, Skaven, black orcs who escape slavery from the Darklands, saber-tusks, rhinoxons. The list goes on and on. There are also some hidden dwarven holds in these mountains, and even some poor halflings that serve as slaves to the Feastmaster ogre tribe. I'm guessing that these guys are their chefs. To the east of the Mountains of Mourne, past the ancient giant lands, is an area with a huge gaping hole in the ground filled with teeth and a big old gullet called the Great Maw. This huge hole is the main deity of the ogres, and it is said that a meteorite hit the ground here eons ago, creating the Great Maw, and in turn displaced the ogres that lived in this area, so they fled to the mountains. There is way more to this story, including a Cathay influence, but we'll save it for another time. Now, to the south of the Mountains of Mourne, in the Sea of Dread, lies a small cluster of islands called the Dragon Isles. These islands are covered in dense swamp and jungles, and are home to a barbaric colony of lizardmen that, like the Southland lizardmen, were left behind when the world was reshaped by the Old Ones. This group of lizardmen have no slan to lead them, so they have basically devolved into savages. All sorts of crazy lizard-like creatures inhabit these islands, like powerful thunder lizards, cold ones, stegodons, and of course venomous snakes. So it's time to head even further east now, to one of the big three empires of men that populate the far eastern region of the Warhammer Fantasy world. And next up we have the Kingdoms of Ind, or as it can be known, the Land of 1,000 Gods. And that's because the people in this region have a god for literally everything. This land stretches from the Mountains of Mourne, runs along the Mountains of Heaven, to the Southern Ocean, and towards the east it hits the southern borders of the Grand Cathay and the Kingdoms of Koresh. There are a few islands off the mainland south, and like always, these have some high elf fortresses located there. Speaking of high elves, I might also add that in the far north of Ind, on the coastline of the Sea of Dread, there is a place called the City of Spires, which was founded by the high elves, and they use this as a trading port with the people of Ind. Now, this exotic, steamy, warm land isn't ruled by a single leader, but is run by several smaller, independent kingdoms, each with their own monarch called a Raja. People of this region are very spiritual, and the kingdoms are known for their spice trade. They have their own version of beastmen here that populate the jungles and are kind of like man tigers or tiger men, and they aren't really looked at with fear or hate like the people of the old world look at their beastmen, because they probably look at these tiger men through a more spiritual view. Now, the Kingdoms of Ind is still set in a bit of mystery, as it was never really fully developed in the Warhammer setting, so it definitely could be seen as a great place for some new narratives or stories to be told in the old world game in the next few years. To the east of the Kingdoms of Ind, we have a pretty large landmass called the Hinterlands of Koresh, which is home to some evil snake men, and I may be wrong, but I thought GW made some miniatures for this back in the old days, or maybe a miniature exists for a Blood Bowl team. This place is another tropical jungle-like region where men are hunted for sport by creatures that lurk here, and it's also home to the lost city of the Old Ones that lies smack bang in the middle of Koresh, and being in the jungle by default means it has a small lizardmen presence. The deep south of Koresh is the closest that any landmass gets to the southern wastes of Chaos. But maybe the southern wastes of Chaos is just Australia, and some of the races of the old world mistook a tree kangaroo for a beastman, hence the words down the bottom here be demons. Anyway, down here we have two elven outposts, one on the Koresh side and one on the Australian side, I mean the southern waste side, that make up the Gates of Calith. These outposts are used by elven sailors as staging points before they head out to the Lost Isles of Ethelis, and also when they want to head to the Turtle Islands off the west coast of Lustria. As we head back north, we'll first venture a little further east to an archipelago of three lonely islands called the Lost Isles of Elithis. These islands are controlled by the High Elves, who have a colony called Tor Elithis on the smaller southwestern island. Now, as I was looking to get more information on these islands, there weren't many details, but it is said that they're taint-free, so that means there are no nasty beastmen there, kind of like how New Zealand has no snakes. We are getting close to the finish line, and let's head a tiny distance north to the next population of men in the Far East, and here we have the Empire of Nippon. Now, I did a small video on this one a while ago where I painted up a ninja ogre and explained some of the Hermit Kingdom, so be sure to check that video out. But anyway, what can I say about Nippon other than it's basically the Japan of the Warhammer Fantasy world? This land is covered by cherry blossom orchids and has a vast mountain range in the north and south. It's a collection of small islands where foreigners rarely travel to. Now, it seems the pesky Skaven made their way to Nippon numerous years ago and learned the way of the ninja, which probably resulted in the creation of Clan Eshin. What I find fun about Nippon is that it's a vast empire controlled by samurai warlords with a feudal governing system, though it is meant to be ruled by a semi-divine emperor known as the Divine Sun. But just like in feudal Japan, the samurai warlords are in charge and hold all the power. Anyway, one of my big hobby dreams is for GW to make a refreshed Nippon army that I can collect and paint, so maybe one day. Alright, let's head even further north and maybe a fraction west, back to the mainland, and here we have the huge powerful nation empire of the Grand Cathay. And at the time of recording this video, we have had the army announced for the Old World, and this has me and a lot of people out there truly excited. This huge empire of men is ruled by a family of immortal dragons and is the most powerful and populated kingdom in the Far East. The Grand Cathay shares a lot of commonalities and aesthetics with ancient China and has a rich history that dates back to even before the old ones came to the planet and started meddling. Geographically, the Grand Cathay takes up a lot of space and has a few distinct regions or provinces as they are known. First up, we have the northern provinces and the Great Bastion, which is located in the most northern region of Cathay and just south of the Eastern Steppes. Very quickly, the Eastern Steppes are a group of plateaus, forests, and large grasslands that are kind of like a gateway to the northern Chaos Wastes. Now, the Great Bastion is a massively fortified wall that runs along the northern border of Cathay to protect it from chaos-led incursions and tribes of men called the Kurgan and Hung that populate this far north. Basically, the Great Bastion is just the Great Wall of China to us. It is that big that tens of thousands of troops are stationed all along its walls at any given time. The northern provinces are ruled by a storm dragon called Mao Ying, and the main city of this region is called Nangao, or the City of Smoke, and this produces the war machines for the Grand Cathay armies. Let's now head to the Western Province, which is ruled by the Iron Dragon, Zhao Ming, and these lands are considered to be a bit more remote than the rest of Cathay and border against the Mountains of Morn and are covered by the Warpstone Desert, which is also the location of the Great Moor. There is a large city smack bang in the middle called Shangyang, and it's considered a trading hub. The central provinces are the heartland of this vast dragon-ruled empire and is run by none other than the Jade Dragon himself, Yan Bo. Being in a central location, this region doesn't suffer from any outside threats compared to the other provinces, so this place has prospered and become the bureaucratic home of Cathay. Shangwu is the capital of this region, and this lies on the banks of the Great River. Next, we have the eastern provinces, and this is the coastal region of the Grand Cathay and ruled by the Sea Dragon, Yin Yin. It has many port cities scattered along the coastline, and it's the lifeblood for trade, making this province the most wealthiest in the Grand Cathay. The city of Fuchao is the largest port on the coast and houses the feared Grand Dragon Fleet Navy of Cathay. What is also interesting is this city is considered the most cosmopolitan city in the known world and is home to plenty of High Elf migrants. You can basically find High Elves everywhere in the Warhammer Fantasy world. Last up, we have the southern provinces, which include the Mountains of Heaven, and this is the frontier region of the Grand Cathay as it borders with Ind and Kuresh. This region is thick with bamboo forests and ruled by the fire dragon Li Dao, who defends the southern borders. The capital of this region is Fuheng and is a city filled with chanting monks. Now, not just men live in this area, but it's also inhabited by great monkey warrior tribes that live among the men as well. Please GW, make some monkey men, I would love to paint them. And very quickly, the Mountains of Heaven are a chain of mountains that border with Ind and Cathay, and this is a disputed stretch of land between the two kingdoms. Now, I'll leave it here with Cathay as I'm sure things will change and be added to the lore very, very soon. Obviously, this video has gone on long enough, so to finish off, I'll go over the Northern Chaos Wastes, where the Northern Warp Gate is located, and this is a weird, crazy land covered in warp stone and chaos energy, so the land itself is constantly changing and warping. It's a land that the chaos gods of the Warhammer Fantasy world have a huge presence in, and is home to beastmen, mutants, crazy monsters, and some pretty crazy humans as well. As the narrative of Warhammer Fantasy or Warhammer The Old World unfolds, the Chaos Waste continue to grow towards the northern borders of men. Funnily enough, there was a time when these lands had a population of dwarves up there, as seen in the book Demon Slayer. This book is a great read if you want to learn the ins and outs about this crazy landscape. Anyway guys, that is pretty much it. Let me know down in the comments below if I missed something that you think's worth bringing up, or if I got something wrong. I'm bound to get one thing wrong. There was just so much information to go through, and like always, I want to say a massive thank you to my Patreon members. You guys are a bunch of legends, and I couldn't do videos like this without you. But anyway guys, that's it for now. I'll see you all next time. Cheers.